Now, millions in Africa are excluded from banking systems due to lack of official identification. Reports indicate that digital ID systems could help governments save up to $50 billion per year by 2020. Ntare Karitanyi, the Managing Director of Hobuka, is here to shed more light on this, on the importance of digital IDs. Thank you so much for creating time. Now, as we start, what is the importance of digital ID?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. Digital ID, as you know, is one of the components of identifying a citizen from the time they're born with vital event information system, birth certificate and what have you, and you have a unique identifier. And that unique identifier takes you through your life. So with that, you can do banking. You can access services, government services. You can do a lot of things. You can buy land. By the way, you need digital ID, but you also need a registry for the land so that it's linked and will help you to monetize or securitize those lands, therefore accessing to credit. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can even go another layer below with the ID. You could also go as far as starting a business where you identify the person behind this particular business. So, you know, in the modern world, you know, it's very difficult to operate in analog mode without
a digital ID. Now, knowing this importance, there's a report by UNECA which states that about 500 million Africans do not have digital ID. Now, why? Why has it taken long, and why so many people?
Well, I think first thing first, I'll say political will, because really the technology is there. I mean, there's really nothing special about the technology. It's there, it's been there for some country for years. I mean, here in Rwanda, I had my national ID 13 years ago. So the technology is there, but the political will, I think it's part of the problem, and be consistent. So as you say, 500 million, that means 50 million people a year for 10 years to reach the SDG goals. So it's not a small job. You also need, to be honest, this is not the technology problem. You also need security, you know, because there are countries that are very wide where central government is not controlling a good portion of the land. So there's a lot of logistical issues that comes when people need digital ID. Yeah. You find all kind of, you'll be surprised, like telecom companies today probably have a lot of information on the citizen of a specific country. If the central government is absent with then you find in countries where, because of a lot of unrest, security unrest, refugees moving around from one country to another. So you find UN agencies like UNHCR and the like, they collect a lot of data on the citizen of Africa, and they take biometrics. So the data is there, but it's scattered.
Yeah, the data is there, it's scattered, but how safe is it for me to have a digital ID, considering how when we look at here in the continent, there's low capacity when it comes to taking care of data protection. Now, how safe is it?
Well, it depends on, well, if you talk about an ID that is controlled by a government, of course it's safe, you know, given that they've invested in the human resources, the infrastructure that goes with it, and obviously you cannot tamper with it because that's actually the citizenship of you know, that's what gives you the right to citizenship. The second thing is for security. Well, when you start talking about going digital, doing e-commerce and things like that, then you need to put up layers of encryption, security, which we are going into the realm of cybersecurity. But I insist, you cannot talk about digital ID if the governments in these countries in Africa do not take the lead. You cannot outsource. It's like outsourcing your security. You cannot outsource your security. You cannot outsource this is your sovereignty, basically. So I think you can meet all this support that is going on around the world, because I think for Africa it's 500 million, for the world is 1 billion. I think that, like I said, the technology is not the problem. Is the will, the implementation, and the remaining on course. That's what we need.
Yeah, you've touched on the governments playing a role as well as the political will. Now, when we look at the private sector, like yourself, would you say you have a role to play in this?
Absolutely, and we are already playing a role. I mean, we're developing systems that obviously that are feeding onto existing infrastructure. I mean, in Rwanda is different because the backbone is there, the data is there, the ID is there. So, I mean, you know, so you're putting a system on top of it. So it's not, I can see in some other countries where you have to start from scratch is a bit more complicated. But we have a role that we have to provide systems that are affordable, that are helping the customers as far as financial transaction, as far as accessing to social services, as far as adding efficiency in whatever operation they're doing. Yeah, so we have a role, but I think our role is to innovate, bringing some new tools. And the good thing in Africa, you have a lot of youth that are just looking for opportunities. So this is really our part. But you know, it's a big elephant, 500 million people. But I would say 50% of that has to be done by governments. And it's, like I say, it's a matter of sovereignty. If you don't do it, then you're prone to problems down the road.
Yeah, and before I let you go, just in a few words, when we look at Africa's digital development, it's mostly hampered by lack of infrastructure, lack of electricity, such challenges. Now, how can we move around those challenges in order for us to develop?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, when you talk about infrastructure, definitely the private sector has to play a role. You know, in Africa, there's also almost 600 million people in Africa that don't have access to electricity. So there are opportunities in things like mini-grids, to develop mini-grids where you can provide electricity to rural people for rural development. And it goes hand in hand with these tools that are brought there. Also, another investment that is required is data centers. We need to have data centers on the continent. You know, I mean, for us, private sector, we see it as a business opportunity. But I also think that often in time, you can talk about this big target, but it has to trickle down to quick, short deliverable, like electricity, data centers, connectivity, and skilled people. Of course, in Africa, we have youth who are very good at catching up with this new technology. We just need to make them to good use and provide opportunities for them. And I believe this challenge can be resolved. Look at China, look at India. You know, these are two different countries, different mode of thinking, but we're talking about billion people here. Yeah. So, and they have access to these ideas. So you can imagine the domino effect on entrepreneurs, on creating opportunities, access to finance and whatever.
Yeah, it has much effect. Now, thank you so much for creating time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Yes, that was Mr. Ntare Karitanyi, the Managing Director of Hobuka,